Welcome to EoZTV. I'm Elder of Zion, and my guest today is Naomi Linder Kahn, who is the director of the International Division of Regavim. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on. I am familiar with Regavim, and the people on that read my blog are as well. I've had the honor of having two tours of various parts of Israel from Regavim in recent years. One of areas around Ma'ale Adumim, and another one in the Negev. So I'd like to be able to speak about both, but and I did videos about both of them, although one of them didn't work out that well. The Negev one I thought I was actually proud of, but I'd like to speak to just in general. Let's just start off with what exactly is Regavim.
Okay, so Regavim is a public Israeli NGO, a non-government organization. We are completely privately funded through donations, people who want to help us advance our agenda, no government funding. And what we try to do is to protect Israel's resources. That begins with Israel's most precious, most basic, and most threatened resource, and that is the land of Israel itself. So we start literally from the ground up, and we divide the country into regions, and we go out into the field every day and see what's out there. Who's doing what? Who's building? Who's planting? Who has the permission to do what they do? Who doesn't? Who's supposed to be enforcing the law? Who isn't? Why? We collect all this information. We investigate all of these things through, aside from our field work, our mapping, our GIS technology, we also look into archives, look at legal records, ownership. We then take it through the bureaucracy. We petition the relevant authorities to enforce the law. If that doesn't work, we go all the way through the court system. And then we go back down again to make sure that court judgments are actually enforced down on the ground. But we do something else that no one else really does. None of that is done by anyone else, really. We are it. We provide the field work information, the basic information, and create the maps that everyone else uses. But we also do something else, and that is that we connect the dots. We take a step back and we look at what picture emerges from all the little bits of information that we collect from the ground up. We try to formulate policy. We try to prevent these problems from recurring. And we try to correct the anomalies either in the enforcement system, in the legal system, in the legislature, so that we can protect our most basic and most important resource, the land of Israel itself, and have something that we can hand down to our children and grandchildren.
So to be a little bit more specific, the legal framework that you are basing all of this on, I imagine is first of all, your legal framework is that Israel has the right to build, obviously, in Judea and Samaria. Are you basing that on, like the 1922, the 19 San Remo type stuff? Or are you just basing it on the law of occupation, saying even if the land is occupied, this is what Israel is allowed to do?
No matter which way you cut it, Israel has full rights in Judea and Samaria. It has rights to build. It has rights to settle. It has rights to develop. And it also has an obligation to prevent misuse of those resources, either whether you're talking about historic rights, biblical rights, religious rights, or you're talking about legal rights, beginning with the San Remo Conference, all the way through the League of Nations, the Balfour Declaration, and all other instruments of international law that come beyond that, including the Oslo Accords. If you want to look at it as a question of customary international law, making believe that there were no treaties and no specific things. So general international law would also give Israel not only the right, but the obligation to issue permits, to regulate, to oversee, and to enforce building and construction and development in all of Judea and Samaria. Aside from all of that, we are involved not only in Judea and Samaria, but throughout Israel, in the north of the country, in the south of the country, in the center of the country, everywhere. Wherever there is land, throughout the land of Israel, wherever there are people using that land, we want to know who's using it, how they're using it, why they're using it the way they're using it, and what should be done about how it is being misused.
So specifically, let's just to go with because I don't want to get into. It's a fun argument, but I don't want to get into the argument with you as the earlier stuff. But just based on Oslo and forward, which I still believe is very solid legal framework. If we consider all of the Judea and Samaria to be belligerently occupied under international law, Israel certainly still has the right and even the obligation to maintain the legal framework as far as land use, correct?
Absolutely. An occupier, which we don't think we are, but even an occupying force has the obligation to protect, to preserve, to develop, to oversee all the use of all resources in the occupied area. That includes issuing permits for every type of construction or infrastructure. There is nothing in international law that prevents the state of Israel from doing that. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. We have an obligation to do so. So no matter how you cut it, we should be there. The state of Israel should be there. It should be enforcing the law. It should be developing the law, which it has declined to do. And again, I reiterate, we do not believe that the areas that were liberated in 1967 are occupied territories under any interpretation of international law for the reasons that we have discussed. But yes, even if you consider them occupied territories, the state of Israel is fully within its rights to build and to enforce building codes, to issue permits, or to demolish things that are not built according to those permits and codes.
Right, and the reason I'm interested in saying, only post-Oslo and only according to that circumstance, I agree with you that I don't believe it's considered occupied. However, the reason I think it's important is because you spend a lot of time speaking to Europe and speaking to Europeans, and especially the European Union, not just appears to be, but they're definitely encouraging the breaking of international law by helping the Palestinians build in Area C where they're not really allowed to.
I would say that it's a comical situation, but it's really not funny. Aside from international law and what they call customary law, the European Union is a signatory to the Oslo Accords. And according to the Oslo Accords, Area C of Judea and Samaria is under full Israeli jurisdiction. Anything that happens in that area must be carried out only according to permits by the relevant authorities, in this case, the State of Israel and its various arms. So on the one hand, they're signatories to the Oslo Accords, and they are violating them. On the other hand, if you say the Oslo Accords are null and void, according to international law, they would still be in violation of the law because they are encouraging, they are carrying out, they are funding violations of the international law that states that only the occupying power is allowed to permit changes on the ground of any kind. So no matter how you cut it, the European Union is violating treaties that it has signed. It's constantly making statements about how it does not support unilateral action of any kind. And then on the other hand, carries out unilateral action constantly by funding illegal construction that is changing the map every day.
Can you give some specific examples of what the EU has been doing? With the names of the villages, towns, hamlets, assorted, collections of a couple of buildings here and there.
So you mentioned, for example, the Ma'ale Adumim area that is known to the international community as E1. E being east, it is the first section of territory east of Jerusalem. As you're standing on Mount Scopus and looking eastward, you can see all the way to the Dead Sea. That is E1. And in E1, because of its tremendous strategic importance, the Palestinian Authority targeted that area from the very, very beginning and began very, very conscientiously, methodically carrying out a program of creating facts on the ground to take control of that territory. And what they did was they used Bedouin, who are easily moved populations and extremely vulnerable stateless people. With European Union funding, they created quote-unquote villages out of thin air, gave them names, gave them narratives, and the European Union provided the funding that put prefabricated housing units all over the territory, and the Palestinian Authority populated these quote-unquote villages with Bedouin in order to take control of the area. So one of the most famous cases that we have been dragging through the Supreme Court for over 10 years now is the case of Kahn al-Ahmar. We call this the flagship case. It's an exemplar case of a phenomenon that we found all through the Judean desert, leading from Jerusalem all the way down to the Dead Sea, and in the other direction as well, leading past the Herodian and through the desert areas. So the European Union supports the creation of these villages. We call them villages. They aren't actually villages, but we have documented hundreds of cases of illegal structures with EU symbols on the side of the buildings, every single one of them, in order for the European Union to claim diplomatic immunity for these structures, so that if the State of Israel actually does take any of them down, the European Union claims that we have violated their international immunity by touching structures that they put there illegally. So it's a comedy of the absurd. There are some of these villages that are 80% EU structures, meaning these villages clearly would not exist at all if the European Union didn't put them there. The Palestinian Authority mapped out the places that it wanted to target for takeover over a decade ago. The Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority at the time, Salam Fayyad, announced his plan in 2009 called Ending the Occupation, Establishing State, in which he essentially abandoned the path of negotiated resolution of the conflict and said, we're not going to achieve what we want this way. What we have to do is create a de facto state through facts on the ground, through construction in strategic areas that will provide territorial contiguity for the Palestinian state. They targeted the spots that needed to be overtaken and then went about, with European Union funding, creating these quote-unquote villages, and then Europeans defended these villages and the people who lived in them in a series of, in a never-ending course of lawfare with unending funds, really. Essentially, it's just a bottomless pit of money that they throw in there, and they drag these cases through the court for decades at a time. And the State of Israel has been either unwilling, doesn't have the political or the international wherewithal, let's say, courage, if you will, to actually enforce the law, that it has the tools to do so. There is nothing stopping the State of Israel other than its fear of what others will say, what repercussions there will be. It is completely within its rights, and the Supreme Court of Israel has actually stated as much. In the case of Kahn al-Ahmar, 6 rounds of Supreme Court hearings. In each of them, the Supreme Court did rule that this quote-unquote village is completely illegal, and it is not in the best interest of the people who are living there to stay there. It has no viable future as a place of, as a habitat. It's not habitable. It's on a highway in a desert area, in a sewage basin runoff, within the municipal lines of an existing Israeli community. For all the reasons in the world, it shouldn't be there. The State of Israel invested millions to create an alternative, modern, free of charge location to relocate the people. And the European Union, together with the Palestinian Authority, have gone to court over and over and over again, dragging all kinds of objections and all kinds of essentially fantasy claims, which they change every single round with every single round, to keep these people in these unbearable situations, really creating a humanitarian crisis, forcing these people to live there just so that the Palestinian Authority can take control physically of crucial strategic points on the map. So you have that in the Ma'ale Adunim area. Now you have it in the Gush Etzion area. You have it further south in the southern Har Hebron area. Several years ago, we made enough noise to actually convince Prime Minister Netanyahu to confront the European Union about this illegal activity. And he did confront Federica Mogherini, the EU's representative here in the Middle East. And the European Union gave a commitment to desist from any further illegal construction in the E1 area. So for the past 4 years or so. There have been no new structures in the E1 area, some new structures in the southern Har Hebron area, but generally the wave of illegal construction that was taking over E1 has been halted. However, Palestinian Authority did not give up the war, it just changed tactics. So now all of the European Union's money is going, rather than into illegal structures, it's going into illegal agricultural projects that are swallowing up huge tracts of Israeli state land, thanks to a loophole in the law that is currently in force in Judea and Samaria. So I can give you more details about that.
Just back up though. I'm just interested in the actual people that are moved into these places. You said they were Bedouin, but do these people have homes beforehand? Are you making it sound like they're being forced to move into Area C? Clearly, the EU is building new schools and stuff along with it in order to. And again, not so much for the educational value, but in order to make it look like, oh, look how horrible Israel is for destroying schools. But I am very interested in who the people are, and are they moving for ideological reasons? Are they moving because they don't have any other place to live? What exactly is happening?
So in different areas, there are different characteristics. In the E1 area, in general, there were Bedouin grazing through the Judean desert. Generally, the Bedouin who are currently in the E1 area are from a tribe called Jahalin. The rest of the tribe is down in the Arad area. In the 1950s, there was a blood feud within the tribe. The weaker families within the tribe were pushed out, and they migrated northward through the Judean desert and ended up in E1. So this was part of their seasonal grazing area, and that's where they were. Unfortunately for them, they were forced out just before the state of Israel granted full citizenship to the rest of the tribe that remained down in the Arad area. So half of the tribe are Israeli citizens living down in the Negev, and the ones who were pushed out and moved up are now technically the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority or the state of Israel, depending on where they are. The Palestinian Authority does not provide let's back up. So these populations essentially are stateless people because they missed out on Israeli citizenship, and the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian urban or rural centers in areas A and B do not allow them in. And you can see this very, very clearly if you ride around in the Ma'ale Adumim area. You go just to Abu Dis, and you see all the Bedouin encampments on the outside, but the Bedouin aren't allowed to move into Abu Dis proper. You see this around all of the Arab population centers in areas A and B. So what did the Palestinian Authority do? They said, okay, here are the Bedouin. And Prime Minister Salam Fayyad came out and said this very, very clearly. He made these pronouncements when he unveiled his plan, and he said, the Bedouin are the foot soldiers in the battle for the creation of Palestine. So they used a very, very ingenious and extremely simple method of putting these people where they wanted them. The only thing a Bedouin needs, the only thing that makes a Bedouin move from place to place is water. So that's why Bedouin move from with the seasons to obtain water sources as the seasons change. So the Palestinian Authority located on the map the places that they needed to take control of, and they placed at those spots water tankers. So the Bedouin came and they took water. And the Palestinian Authority then came every couple of, however long it took, a week, 2 weeks, and replaced the empty tankers with full tankers. So the Bedouin stayed where they were put because they had free water, they had no reason to move. The next thing the Palestinian Authority did in every case, especially as it did in Khan al-Ahmar, for example, and in hundreds of other places, was they built a school. So the first permanent structure on the ground in Khan al-Ahmar, our flagship case, was the school. It was funded by an Italian NGO called Vento di Terra. And when the people on whose land all this was happening, the people living in Kfar Etzion, saw what was going on, that there was a permanent structure going up on the ground, they contacted Regavim and they said, we have a problem because the Bedouin, with whom we have no problem, have become permanent There are permanent structures going up, and we don't know exactly what to do. They called Regavim. We did our research. We obtained aerial photos of the area, proving beyond a shadow of doubt that these people never had any structures there. There was never any village there. There was never any settlement there of any kind. The land is, part of the land on which they're sitting is slated within the municipal boundaries of Kfar Adumim, and part of it is slated for the expansion of Route 1, the main highway that leads from the Dead Sea up to Jerusalem. So where did the children of Khan al-Ahmar or all of these villages from around there learn before the Palestinian Authority saw to it that they had schools built in each of these quote-unquote villages? Well, it's very, very simple. They learned in Jericho, which is very, very nearby. And in Jericho, they had a school building with a yard and running water and electricity and air conditioning, because it's in the desert, and all the things that a school should have. But instead, the children in Khan al-Ahmar were built a school made out of used tires and recycled falafel oil and mud. No electricity, no water, no yard, on a highway on land that doesn't belong to them. And yes, it's not humane, it's not a good situation, it's not in the best interest of the people of Khan al-Ahmar to stay there, but they're between a rock and a hard place. And we have interviews, taped interviews from international television stations who've sat down with these Bedouin and talked to them. And the head of the Khan al-Ahmar family there, the clan, said, look, the Palestinians and the Europeans tell us we must not move and we must not accept any deal that Israel offers. We have to stay where we are. And the Israelis say we have to move. So we're here, we don't know what to do. The state of Israel created an alternative for them, offered them a cash handout, moving assistance, free land, fully developed residential plots, and a school with air conditioning, electricity, running water, etc., on state land in Area C, just outside of Abu Dis. So they would be near an Arab population center. They would have all of the advantages. And the European Union and the Palestinian Authority will not allow them to move. This is happening over and over and over again in that area. In other areas, the dynamic is slightly different. For example, in the southern Hebron area, on IDF training grounds, started off with Bedouin who moved in and for some reason were allowed to stay on a small section of the firing zone. And that became expanded more and more and more. The Palestinian Authority brought electricity over from Yatta, which is a Palestinian Authority-controlled Arab town. And people from Yatta, who have homes in Yatta, were given tax incentives and all sorts of other incentives to actually go and build another house in these areas, Daraj, Chashan Daraj it's called, on IDF training grounds. So we've gone to court about a lot of this, but it's a bizarre scene. Anybody who wants to see it for themselves, you go out to the southern Hebron Hills communities, the Jewish communities, and you look out over the back fence and you see roads with road signs and pavement and electricity and hundreds of permanent, massive palatial structures being built with European funding. And the signs are all over the place. This is built by UK aid. The UK actually had a whole unveiling ceremony for a road that they funded on an IDF training ground, 375 or so thousand British pounds this past year. But millions are being invested, and the state of Israel has done nothing to stop the creation of these cities on IDF training grounds.
Does the EU fund any building in areas A or B?
No. The EU doesn't fund. First of all, the EU calls all of this humanitarian aid. It's rather cynical because they, for example, the case of Khan al-Ahmar, they create a humanitarian crisis by forcing people to live in unhabitable areas, and then say, well, look at the conditions that they're living in. They have no electricity and running water. Of course we have to help them. Well, don't force them to live there and allow them to live in normal places and you won't have that problem. But the Palestinian Authority has targeted these areas, and the European Union simply does the funding. So they don't fund anything like this anywhere else in the world. They don't fund illegal construction, any construction, really, anywhere in the world. Now, the same Bedouin tribes live in Jordan, which is just across the street practically from these areas in E1. Not a penny goes there. The same Bedouin live down in the Negev in the same conditions as people who are, not a penny goes to them. They're the same Bedouin tribes in the same condition living in areas A and B. They don't get a penny either. The only place that the EU does this is the places that are of political importance, their strategic importance, and they've been earmarked by the Palestinian Authority as the backbone of the Palestinian state. And that's why the European Union is creating these facts on the ground, breaking the law, supporting unilateral change, and completely, I would say, voiding any necessity that the Palestinian Authority might feel to negotiate. They have no reason to negotiate if the European Union is funding the creation of a state without any compromise, without any conversation, exactly where they tell them. They say, I want this spot, they get that spot. They want, 100 million people spread out all over wherever it is, obviously not 100 million, but if they want wherever the Palestinian Authority has created this plan is where the European Union is putting the money to make it happen.
The EU would respond that they would be, very happy if Israel would allow building permits. They say they're practically impossible for Arabs to get building permits in Area C. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so we've heard this claim over and over and over again. It's essentially two sides of one coin. The claims are either A, that the state of Israel does not give building permits in Area C to Arabs, and therefore they have no choice but to build illegally. And the other claim is that they have a serious crisis and there's no room for them to grow or to develop, so therefore they have to slide into Area C to build. So we checked both of these claims, simply factual checking. Number one, does the civil administration issue permits for construction in the Arab sector in Area C? Since its creation, the last documents that I saw from 2015, thousands of units, thousands of housing units, thousands of projects were approved by the civil administration for Arab construction in Area C. One of the problems is it's not resolving any crisis of theirs, because the point of all of their construction is not to alleviate a housing crisis. If it were, they would build multi-story units. They would build 4 and 5 and 6-story units or more. Instead, they're building that way rather than that way. So they're not solving the problem because the problem doesn't exist. This was the next part of our research. We simply purchased satellite photography, satellite images of areas A, B, and C to see how much open space there is available. And what we found is that in areas A and B, areas where the Palestinian Authority has full jurisdiction over civilian matters, and can issue building permits and carry out planning and do anything it wants, and having nothing to do with Israel, not needing any approval from Israel whatsoever, they have not done anything with all their open space. 63% of the open areas of areas A and B are available for construction. They can build houses there without any problem. They could solve the housing crisis for generations to come. But none of their resources are invested in construction in areas A and B, only in area C. And it becomes clear from this that it is politically motivated. There's no question that it's politically motivated, because that's where all the resources are going, and also because they said so. Prime Minister Salam Fayyad announced 10 years ago that was what they were going to do. Areas A and B didn't need attention because they were already off the table. They were already under Palestinian control. And all the resources and the battle had to be fought in Area C. So for 10 years, the Palestinian Authority has been carrying out the Fayyad plan methodically, one step after another, either through illegal construction or through illegal agriculture and infrastructure projects, while the state of Israel keeps agreeing to do voluntary construction freezes and has essentially not grown in those same 10 years, while the Palestinian Authority, in a constant movement of acceleration, of exponential acceleration, particularly now with the Corona shutdown, and particularly since the rollout of the Trump peace plan, has targeted very successfully these areas, strategic areas and areas in Area C, and taken them over. The state of Israel has lost thousands, tens of thousands of dunams of land to these Palestinian Authority projects that are funded by the European Union.
Not too long ago, about like last year, you were supposed to speak in London for UK Lawyers for Israel, and it looks like there was some controversy. Your talk was postponed, and from what I could tell, you eventually managed to speak, but there was a big protest outside. Can you go a little bit into what exactly happened?
Yes, it was actually very sad, I have to say. I had been invited to speak on my way to the European Union. We went to the European Union, myself and Mayor Deutsch, the Director General of Regavim, and Yachin Zik, who is our Director of Operations. We went to the European Union in Brussels to speak to members of Parliament, to present our findings, to explain to them where European money was going, and to discuss with them the really the very foundations of what was being passed off as humanitarian aid and what the ramifications were for a negotiated resolution to the conflict when only one side keeps changing the rules and the facts on the ground. So on my way to Brussels, I was supposed to, in January, stop in London and to speak to membership of UK Lawyers for Israel. A day of rage was threatened. The pro-Palestinian groups in London got together and they launched a massive campaign and threatened a full day of rage on the Sunday that I was supposed to speak to keep me from presenting the facts that I wanted to present and that people wanted to hear and discuss in a civilized manner. So the event was supposed to be hosted in someone's home, and that person became very alarmed that there was going to be serious trouble. We could not find a more neutral venue quickly enough to reschedule at the time. So we decided to put it off until a better venue could be found and security arrangements could be put in place. So it was put off for a few months. And actually, it was the other way around, I believe. Supposed to be in September, and then it ended up in January. I've lost the plot. In any case, we contacted the Jewish community in London, has its own internal security organization. We contacted them. We discussed the issue. They did not feel that there was a real threat. At the same time, we contacted the London Metropolitan Police, and they thought that there really was a threat. So luckily, on the evening that the talk really did happen, the rescheduled talk, the police came, Metropolitan Police came with a full force, and luckily they were there and they stayed throughout the evening because there was a very vocal and rambunctious and not very polite, not very un-British sort of thing, demonstration outside of the venue. They tried to drown out the presentation. They brought loudspeakers and bullhorns and music, and they were ringing bells and foghorns and all sorts of noise to try to see to it that no one could hear what I had to say. The neighbors around the hall that the event was held in were very displeased, but the police protected the event and all the participants. We had to be escorted out to our cars when the evening was over. It was very sad that they felt they weren't. We invited them and representatives of these organizations to carry on a civilized debate. They refused, and that's the path they chose. In the end, I was very happy that all the attendees were not deterred. We had a full room, and people heard what they heard and were given enough information to make their own decisions, which is, I think, the way it should be.
Sure. I saw part of the video of you speaking, and it's the protests are certainly audible in the background. It's very interesting. I just to when you were about to speak I guess the second time, I'm just showing up on the screen right now. This sort of a pro-Hamas newspaper called Middle East Monitor. It says, why is a right-wing Israeli group coming to London to advocate destroying Palestinian lives? So I'm just going to ask straight out, what is Regavim's position as far as Palestinian lives are concerned?
We have absolutely no interest in destroying any lives. As a matter of fact, what we advocate for is law and order for everyone, equal obligations under the law, equal enforcement of the law. We don't advocate for illegal activity of any kind. We believe that without law and order and equal enforcement, we will have chaos, and we don't want chaos. We have waited for millennia to have a state, to have a homeland, to have a Jewish country. We have Jewish values that we want to express. We have a Jewish future and a Jewish destiny that we want to express. And the only way to do that, and I believe that everyone agrees, the only way to do that is to ensure that it is a place of law and order, that people have equal protection under the law, equal obligations under the law. And the reason that we have a government and a military and a police force and a judiciary and a legislature is to make sure that we have laws that ensure that we can live like human beings in this generation and in the next, and that we will have a Jewish homeland to pass down to our children. Yes, there are people who live here who are not Jewish. Yes, we are in favor of living with them peacefully under the law. We believe that if the law is enforced equally, we will have a way forward to discuss, to negotiate, to reach a resolution, to find a way for people to live in dignity together peacefully. But both sides have to want that. As you know, when both sides don't want that, then the only thing you have left is the law. That's what we have. And we have to preserve that law. We have to enforce that law equally, but vigorously. Otherwise, we're going to have chaos.
What is Regavim's position towards illegal Jewish settlements? You know, occasionally Jews are going to say, "Hey, we want to have this place as well," and this is against at least official Israeli law. What does Regavim say to those?
First of all, there's no need for us to say, because there are, 10 different NGOs that jump down. I live in a community called Givat Ze'ev. Givat Ze'ev is officially over the Green Line, although it is built on land that has been owned by the Jewish family since the early 1900s. Signed, sealed, and delivered, but it is over the Green Line. If I build 3 inches over the building line that has been approved, the inspectors will come and they will knock it down. And that is as it should be. But Regavim doesn't need to come to my house and report on that, for the simple reason that Peace Now and all of the others of their ilk are watching very, very carefully. They know every single thing that's going on in the Jewish communities and outside of them. So we don't need to deal with those things. We are not in favor of illegal activity of any kind. We do not support it. We do not justify it. We do not believe that that is the way forward. We believe that the state of Israel owes it to itself and to its citizens and to its future citizens and to Jewish destiny and to world history to create a system in which that will not be necessary, in which there will be a way for people, Jewish people, to own land, to build on that land, to build lives here and to build a community and to build a state. So we're in favor of the law.
And just finally, you made an interesting point in the very beginning of your speech in London, and I'd like to just have you reiterate that. Over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, how many of the Jewish communities that are there were built on top of old Palestinian villages or on top of ancient Arab lands?
So this is going to come as a real shock to many, many people, but 0. The answer is 0. Over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, all the Jewish communities that exist, and by the way, people are also very shocked when I tell them how much of Judea and Samaria is covered by Jewish settlement of any kind. The grand total is less than 1% of the entire area of Judea and Samaria. The portion of Judea and Samaria under Israeli jurisdiction, Area C, less than 2% of Area C is actually covered by Jewish settlement of any kind. But the communities that do exist in Judea and Samaria were all built, without exception, on areas that had no Arab settlement, no pre-existing settlement of any kind. This is a fact. Strangely, we have a lot of these purists who say, oh, I won't go over the Green Line because it's stolen land, but they live in Tel Aviv or Jaffa or Ashkelon or Beersheba or Jerusalem, lots of different places. Many of those places, many of those Jewish cities within the Green Line were built on the ruins of pre-existing Arab villages from one point or another in history. So don't believe the narrative. The narrative is false, and it is purposely false. Purposefully and purposely false. The communities that exist in Judea and Samaria, and they're not all the same. So, for example, where I live, Kibbutz Ze'ev is built on land that was owned, lock, stock, and barrel by the Angel family. The land that this chair is on right now, that you are looking at, was owned by, bought and registered to Solomon Angel in 1919, and has been passed down through his family until it was eventually developed. The land in Gush Etzion, for example, the communities of Gush Etzion predate the state of Israel. The fact that the Jordanian Legion overran those communities, massacred most of the people who were left in them, and took the rest of them prisoner in 1948, is neither here nor there. Those communities were not built on the ruins of anything else, and they were not built after 1967. They were rebuilt after 1967. Making blanket statements is a bad idea in general, particularly on this subject. But the communities of Judea and Samaria, without exception, were built on empty land, on state land, which belongs to the state of Israel. In the rare occasions where there were private owners, that has been corrected. That's why we have a Supreme Court, and those are extreme exceptions to the much larger rule.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate you coming on as a guest. Again, I am Elder of Zion, and my guest was Naomi Linder Kahn, the director of the International Division of Regavim. This was really informative. I will be pushing people to watch this. And again, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
For now, I will be signing off again, and I will see everybody next time. For now, I'm Elder of Zion. I will see you guys later. Okay, we're done.